I never put much stock in concepts like karma, destiny, or the idea that deeds circle back eventually. At least, not until that particular evening. It was the end of March, and the chill lingered far beyond its welcome. I was 30, penniless and exhausted, not the sort of weariness a solid rest could mend, but one that burrowed deep into your core. I'd been employed at a home improvement shop for just over 2 years, barely managing to survive. My rent payments were perpetually delayed, my vehicle was a single rough patch from total breakdown, and my bank balance hadn't exceeded 3 figures in ages. That evening, I trudged home on foot since my aging Volkswagen wouldn't ignite once more. It was merely a 20-minute stroll, yet it seemed endless under the cover of night. The lampposts in my area were the type that blinked as if possessed, and the pavements were fractured sufficiently to sprain a foot if you weren't vigilant. I paused at a modest petrol station on the edge to pick up an inexpensive meal, perhaps a heatable wrap and a mug of soluble tea. As I went for my purse, I discovered I possessed precisely 20 euros remaining. Not the paydays tomorrow variety. This was everything I owned until the end of the week. I paused at the till. The attendant, a youth likely just graduated from secondary school, processed my purchases without lifting his gaze. From behind, a person coughed lightly. "Pardon me," a voice uttered, a male tone gravelly and hesitant. I pivoted, and there stood this fellow in his late 40s, possibly early 50s. His attire was threadbare, the sort of wear that stems from hardship rather than fashion, from countless evenings exposed to the elements. His stubble was uneven, his palms roughened, and he clutched a tiny paper beaker as though it were delicate. "Hello, mate," he whispered. "Apologies for interrupting, but might you spare a couple of euros? I simply require a roll or something hot. Haven't had a bite since the day before." The attendant peered up briefly, his expression conveying, "Avoid any issues here." I'm not sure why, but my gut churned. Typically, I'd merely decline. After all, I could scarcely nourish myself. Yet something in this man's gaze halted me. He wasn't intoxicated, not under the influence, not scheming. Just vacant, as if existence had stripped him bare and he lacked the energy to reclaim it. I glanced at the 20-euro note in my grasp. That was fuel funds, meal funds, housing funds if I managed it wisely. "All right," I replied before reason could intervene. I passed him the 20. He widened his eyes, taken aback. "Are you certain, friend?" he inquired, as if doubting it. "Yes," I affirmed. "Treat yourself to a proper feed, perhaps a spot indoors to rest for a while." He regarded me briefly, seeming on the verge of adding more, then inclined his head gradually. "May fortune favor you," he whispered. "You can't imagine the impact." And with that, he departed, through the exit into the frost. I journeyed home that night with a vacant purse and an odd weight upon my heart. I wasn't certain if I'd performed a noble deed or a foolish one. I warmed a stale tin of broth and retired famished. The ensuing week proved challenging. I exceeded my account limit on 2 occasions, had to request a 10-euro loan from a colleague merely to reach salary day. Each time I accessed my cupboard, I recalled that 20-euro note and experienced a blend of irritation and remorse. I attempted to persuade myself that I'd acted correctly. Another soul required it more correct. But that failed to soften the overdue housing alert. Existence simply continued onward. I encountered fresh customers at the job, identical debts, the same faulty Volkswagen that declined to perish yet also refused to function. I ceased pondering the man. Truthfully, I assumed our paths wouldn't cross again. Until roughly 3 months afterward. It was a muggy June dawn, and I'd commenced my duty at the shop. I was handling the checkout when this individual entered, clad in a neat blouse, trousers that suited properly, and a flat cap drawn down. He appeared somewhat recognizable, but I couldn't pinpoint it. He approached me directly, grinning as if privy to a secret I wasn't. "Hello," he stated. "You likely don't recall me." I examined him once more, then it struck, the gaze. Those identical weary eyes, only now they held substance. "You're the chap from the petrol station," I uttered deliberately. He affirmed with a nod. "Indeed, I've been wishing to encounter you once more." Before I could respond, he delved into his pocket and extracted an envelope. "This belongs to you," he declared, pushing it over the counter. "And before you object, no, it's not pity, it's appreciation." I furrowed my brow, peeking within. It was currency, a substantial amount, hundreds of euros, fresh, creased notes. "Hold on, what is this?" I questioned. He chuckled gently. "Let's say, circumstances improved for me. I entered a refuge that evening, received assistance, secured employment with a building firm a few villages away, been accumulating savings. That 20 you provided, that was the initial gesture of compassion I'd witnessed in ages. It altered my path. I vowed that if I regained stability, I'd reciprocate." I attempted to return the envelope to him. "Friend, I cannot." He shook his head. "No debate. You offered me a beginning when I possessed naught. I'm merely completing the cycle." He grinned once more, the sort of grin that reveals the world isn't entirely harsh. Then he pivoted and exited before I could express gratitude adequately. When I tallied it subsequently, there was precisely 200 euros enclosed, tenfold what I'd bestowed upon him. That evening I reclined in my compact flat, gazing at that envelope. And for the initial occasion in an extended period, I sensed something absent for years: optimism. Following that occasion, I couldn't cease reflecting on him, on the envelope, the manner he beamed when he mentioned completing the cycle. It seemed dreamlike, akin to an entry from those uplifting threads you skim on social media, dismissing as improbable. But it occurred, it transpired to me. The currency itself wasn't the most profound impact. 200 euros was splendid. It settled my pending obligations and provisions for a week, but what truly endured was the sentiment underlying it. For the first time in weeks, I felt linked, as though perhaps the world acknowledged me anew. I'd been adrift for such a duration, attending work, returning home, reheating whatever was economical, dozing to the noise of my neighbor's radio via the partition. That envelope represented the initial spark in a shadowy passage. A week hence, I resolved to alter my routine. There was this cafe 2 streets from my residence, Anna's Spot. I traversed it daily en route to employment, but never entered since cafes exceeded my means. But that Friday, post-depositing my wages, I stepped inside. The aroma assaulted me initially. Tea, sausages, and that subtle honeyed essence of syrup permeating the atmosphere. There were perhaps 5 patrons within. 2 elderly men debating football, a youthful mother serving her child crepes, and a server with fatigued eyes and a badge reading Anna. I requested crepes and tea, occupied the rear table, and for once didn't verify my finances prior to settling. As I prepared to depart, I observed a modest handwritten notice by the till. Neighborhood Meal Initiative, purchase a dish for those in hardship. Adjacent was a petite container, partially vacant. Without overthinking, I withdrew 40 euros from the envelope, half of my remainder, and inserted it. Anna glanced up astonished. "That's kind, dear," she remarked. "Certain." I beamed. A person aided me when I required it, merely reciprocating. She inclined her head gradually, as if comprehending precisely. That minor gesture evolved into a pattern. Weekly, I'd visit Anna, sip tea, perhaps a morning meal if feasible, and contribute a few euros to that container. I shared the reason with no one. I anticipated no return. It simply seemed appropriate. Amusingly, when you commence minor benevolent actions, the world begins responding subtly at first. One dawn, approximately 2 months later, I was at employment assisting a patron select wall coatings. She was this senior lady, perhaps mid-60s, courteous yet anxious. She noted she'd recently relocated to the area to proximity her offspring and desired to refresh her dwelling to render it novel once more. We conversed extensively, and I aided her in choosing the apt shade scheme. Something gentle, cozy, a sort of softened apricot she claimed evoked her deceased spouse. She expressed gratitude for dedicating time to assist. 2 days hence, she returned, not for purchases but to locate me. She presented a paper sack. Merely a minor appreciation, she stated. Within was a crafted tart, pear and spice still tepid. I hadn't savored homemade fare in months. I attempted to decline, but she persisted. We chatted again briefly. Her name was Maria, and she evoked my grandmother somewhat. That modest item, that tart brightened my week. And that's when it dawned. Perhaps benevolence wasn't a grand, valiant motion. Perhaps it was a silent sequence, transferring from individual to individual, at times unseen, but perpetually vibrant. About a year elapsed. My existence didn't transform into a film, no abrupt windfalls or ideal roles, but matters became less burdensome. I advanced to deputy supervisor. My aged Volkswagen ultimately surrendered, but a colleague offered his van inexpensively. I accumulated modest reserves. I even commenced evening sessions at the local institute, administration studies. Then one dawn, while securing the premises after shutdown, I spotted a known visage by the car park. It was him, the chap from the petrol station, the one I'd granted the 20 to. He appeared altered once more, fitter assured, like one who'd discovered his balance. He smiled upon sighting me. "Hello, mate," he said. "Spare a moment." We proceeded to the cafe, Anna's, naturally, and updated each other. He revealed his name was George, that he'd maintained steady labor, amassed funds, even assisted at the identical refuge that restored him. Then he uttered something that froze me. "You aware of that cafe initiative, where you fund meals for unknowns?" I nodded cautiously. "Yes, what about it?" He grinned. "That saved me as well. A few months prior, a youth arrived from elsewhere, destitute, starving, frightened. Anna informed him a benefactor had prepaid his dish, said he nearly wept upon hearing. He sipped his tea. "You initiated something, mate. Locals discuss it now, Anna's pot. People contribute regularly." I remained seated, astounded. I hadn't grasped the extent of that wave. George reclined and chuckled. "Odd, isn't it? You offer 20 euros to an unfamiliar, and suddenly an entire community sustains one another." Later that evening, strolling home, I contemplated the completeness of it all. That initial 20 euros had expanded immensely. Not merely the 200 he returned, but the subtle evidence that positive deeds resonate, even sans tally. And perhaps that was the genuine insight. You never foresee what your tiniest compassion can evolve into. Yet existence as it is, it didn't remain simple. Several months later, the home improvement shop reduced staff. My superior summoned me to his chamber, stated it wasn't targeted, just cost reductions. I was unemployed. For the first instance in years, I sensed that identical burden returning. Housing was imminent. Obligations accumulated. I endeavored to remain composed, assuring myself solutions would emerge, but the dread struck intensely. I refreshed my CV, submitted applications everywhere feasible, storage facilities, courier roles, anything. No fortune. After 3 weeks, I was reduced to my final few hundred euros again. One night, I discovered myself passing Anna, peering through the glass. It was tardy, the illumination subdued just on a cleaning surfaces. I nearly proceeded, but something, perhaps dignity, perhaps fatigue, prompted me to enter. She looked up and smiled gently. "Hello, acquaintance, not seen you lately." "Yes," I responded, seating myself. "Life's been difficult recently." She served me tea unprompted, the regular. I affirmed. When I attempted payment afterward, she dismissed it. "No need," she said. "A patron already settled for you." I blinked, pardoned. She beamed broader. "Indeed. One of your frequent visitors came earlier, left funds, and said, if he drops by, inform him it's covered. I sat silently, my voice caught. It mattered not who, perhaps George, perhaps another. But I comprehended, the cycle wasn't concluding this time, it persisted. That night, traversing under the identical blinking lampposts where it commenced, I chuckled. Not because all was abruptly resolved, but because for the first time I genuinely trusted it would. It had been around 6 months since I departed the home improvement shop. Existence wasn't flawless, distant from it, but it seemed less heavy. In some manner, the minor benevolent gestures I'd released had constructed this unseen support, and strangely it appeared the cosmos had observed. One Monday morning, I received a ring from an unknown digit. I nearly disregarded it, presuming junk, but intuition led me to answer. Greetings, a sharp, formal tone said. Is this Alex Thompson? Yes, my pulse quickened. I'm Laura from Verdant Distributors. We obtained your CV via a local endorsement scheme and your background impressed. Available for a discussion today. I stiffened. The prior interview 2 months back had been disastrous. This seemed distinct. The meeting was utterly otherworldly. Verdant was a compact yet expanding firm, the type where they valued dedication, not merely qualifications. I described my tenure at the home improvement shop, my minor endeavors, the client relations I'd refined over time. At the close, the director smiled. We appreciate your outlook. We'll contact shortly. 2 days later, the call arrived. I was accepted. A permanent role, superior compensation, perks, and advancement potential. Exiting the structure that day, I chuckled inwardly. This was it. After months of barely surviving, something at last seemed enduring. But existence encompassed more than monetary fluctuations. A few weeks into my fresh position, I was aiding at the nearby Civic Hub one twilight, organizing a modest charity event. That's when I encountered Alina. Alina possessed this serene assurance. She was engaged in a charitable effort for disadvantaged youth locally, and I was immediately captivated by her zeal. We began discussing trivial matters, preferred novels, tea venues, the climate, and then the dialogue intensified. We both chuckled at the banality. You've altered my existence in manners you'll never comprehend. But it wasn't banal. Somehow, after months of invisibility, I felt recognized. Over the subsequent months, our bond strengthened. Suppers, extended rambles, conversations enduring till midnight. I realized, gradually yet certainly, I was enamored with her. Then arrived the unforeseen element. One Friday, I was concluding the shift, wrapping up, when George entered. The chap from the petrol station, the one I'd given 20 euros to months prior. He presented an envelope. My heart leaped. Open it, he said, smiling. Inside was a check. Not 200 this time, not even 500. It was 5,000 euros. What, how, I faltered. George laughed. Mate, recall the initial 20 euros, that minor compassionate act you performed for me? That cycle, I finally stabilized, launched a modest investment venture, made wise decisions, and truthfully I wish to reciprocate to the fellow who trusted me when I had zilch. I was speechless. 5,000 euros. Not vast wealth, but sufficient to erase liabilities, repair the aged van, perhaps even begin reserving for permanence. A week later at Anna's, I found her observing me quietly as I sat. You appear unburdened, she said softly. I am unburdened, I confessed, owing to all of you really. She smiled. It's as if the cosmos has this peculiar method of rewarding when folks act kindly. Matters began accelerating thereafter. With the additional funds, I ultimately renovated my flat, coated the walls, swapped the worn settee, acquired a modest bookcase. I even resumed preparing meals, something I had ignored for years. Alina and I commenced courting formally. Our connection wasn't ideal. We disputed, differed, and occasionally existence threw surprises. But we were dedicated. and it seemed every minor benevolent act I'd contributed had subtly guided me here. Then came the true climax, the definitive evidence of the wave effect. One twilight, I got a message on a professional network from an unknown. A man named Mark, whom I didn't know directly, but who'd been directed to me by a contact at Verdant. "I learned of your efforts at the Civic Hub," the note stated. "I operate a compact tech enterprise and we're seeking someone with honesty, endurance, and guidance skills. We're providing an ownership stake, no obligations, and I wanted to check your interest." I stared at my device, thoughts whirling. Ownership, guidance, a role that could reshape my life's course. I agreed. Advance 6 months. I'm overseeing a compact group, aiding in developing a service that might affect thousands. Elena is my anchor, the one who maintains my stability. Anna's cafe remains my weekend custom. George, he's my associate in small enterprises, a camaraderie forged by a €20 note that transformed all. The odd aspect of everything, I never anticipated any of this. That single gesture of donation, a minor €20 offering to a needy unknown, had escalated into something unimaginable. Economic security, romance, societal esteem, a purpose, all from one altruistic move. It's amusing how tales are shared digitally. Folks adore turmoil, deceit, sorrow. They endorse the disorder. But occasionally existence delivers the subtle, unforeseen triumphs, the type that aren't ostentatious, but they weigh immensely more, infinitely more gratifying. I reflect on that evening constantly, trudging home, empty pockets, sensing nothing could improve. And now, years on, that instant seems a prior existence. A former self, striving, hopeless, yet unwittingly sowing seeds for something vastly greater. At times, I find myself grinning at the ridiculousness. A minor €20 note, an unknown's faith, a neighborhood container, a crafted tart, a compassionate phrase, and abruptly all shifts. Existence needn't be a majestic tale of fortune or enchantment. Sometimes, it's merely the silent sequence of benevolence, minor, apparently trivial, but revolutionary in ways you'll never entirely grasp. I frequently post about this online, aiming to motivate others. Even when it seems you possess nothing, even amid overwhelming debts, obligations, grief, isolation, minor positive deeds count. They resound further than imagined. And occasionally, just occasionally, they return amplified 10 times. I donated my final €20 to an unknown when I was destitute. Months later, he repaid it, multiplied by 10. En route, that deed ignited a sequence of benevolence, neighborhood bonds, surprising prospects, and even affection. Existence is odder and more compassionate than you perceive.